Welcome into another episode of Kick Off the Tip Off with Noah and Gage, coming at you with NFL teams that need to nail this upcoming draft. They need to nail it because for some it might be they didn't do much in the offseason, or free agency I guess I should say, or they're a couple playmakers away from having something very special rolling there. Gage, I'll let you kick this round off with your first pick. Who's your one team? We're going to go two each. So what's your first team that needs to nail the draft?
Yeah, you and I kind of identified four teams, two each, who desperately need a good draft. And when we say draft, we're not just talking about the first round. I feel like people, obviously the NFL draft is a huge deal, and people watch the first round and then never see anything else. And that's not the reality of the NFL. Well, yeah, majority of your players, your good players, are coming in the first round. You see all the time these guys, rounds 3 through 7, who are the ones that end up being true difference makers. I look at the Philadelphia Eagles, your Super Bowl champions. They win all the time and have success in the postseason because of how well they draft throughout the entirety of the draft, right? So that brings us to the four teams we've kind of identified, Noah, for maybe one reason or another, that are in this situation where if they do not have a good draft this upcoming April, you're going to be looking at a really tough and long year. So the first one that I want to get into, Noah, a team that I think I could sit here and talk about for hours, the San Francisco 49ers. You're picking at pick 11, a spot that you're not really used to. And this offseason has just been a complete gutting of your roster, right? You think about they extended Ayuk really late. They have the looming extension of Brandon Ayuk, or I'm sorry, the looming extension of Brock Purdy. So you have a ton of money tied up between guys, and you no longer have the money to re-sign a lot of these guys that they've saw walk out of the door. So what do, right? What happens? Deebo Samuel's gone. You traded him to the Commanders. Jordan Mason is gone. He went to the Minnesota Vikings, which, reality check, Noah, he was pretty good. I mean, he was thrown into a position where he was in the spotlight in a Shanahan offense because of the McCaffrey Achilles tendonitis stuff going on, but he was a pretty good running back. I'd look for him to have some significant playing time in Minnesota. You released Javon Hargrave, and then you look at the free agency teams, guys have already gone, right? Dre Greenlaw's gone, a really good linebacker, but he was kind of a mess there late in the year where he was like, I'm not playing anymore. I'm done with you guys, whatever. Charchavius Ward, a really good cornerback for you, gone because of some stuff, the issues, not to say issues, but the PTSD and some horrible stuff that happened with his daughter. So obviously keeping Charchavius Ward in prayers and things like that. Hufanga, their talented safety who was never on the field due to injury, he goes to the Broncos. Aaron Banks goes to the Packers, one of the best guards in the entire NFL. Jalen Moore, the backup who didn't get a ton of playing time, goes to the Chiefs because of a need for them, and then they couldn't re-sign them. It's all over the place. You look, and this team is going to currently has fresh faces. So you look at this upcoming draft, Noah, for a team who, let's be honest, in the past few years hasn't necessarily drafted very well. Ricky Pearsall, their first-round pick this past year, you obviously give him a little bit of leeway because of the situation he dealt with last year, but it was kind of a shocking pick because you had Deebo, you had Ayuk, who you just extended, but now it's looking like he's going to have to play a huge role because of Ayuk coming off this huge knee injury. And it's a guy you invested first-round draft capital in. So you're sitting here not only in the first round at pick 11, hoping to get a true difference maker to keep you in contention in the NFC, but throughout this entire draft, they have major, major holes to fill.
Yeah, and something I think you hit on really there is the looming contract extension of Purdy. And that has so much to do with as to why you have to nail this draft, right? Because you don't have the money to go out there and spend a lot in free agency. You get rid of Deebo, which I think might have been the right move. You still retain McCaffrey. You have to really hit these guys, like you said, not even want your first and second pick, that 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 pick, because those guys are going to be able to, elevate you, whether it be depth or whether they start. These are impact players that you have to get on the field because you have a guy who's due money. Not saying you and I both aren't the biggest Purdy fans, but if you don't go with
not
Purdy,
not for the number he wants. That's kind of our idea of it, right? I'm not saying and disagreeing that he's not a good player. We just, the money that he's kind of demanding is eyebrow raising. And respectfully, I understand from his point, go get your money. You're Mr. Irrelevant. Like, you weren't making a ton of money out of the draft. So this is your chance to really cash in.
Yeah, and that's where I was kind of going with it, was in the sense of, okay, now you're due him money, but the problem for me with signing him that much money is he's had 3 years with some of the best rosters in the NFL, and they weren't able to get it done. They weren't able to get over the hump. So even more in the sense of, look, you have to kill this draft because the clock is ticking, right? So like eventually McCaffrey is going to either hang it up or he's going to find himself another place. Ayuk coming back off that knee injury, how good's he going to be? George Kittle, who's been one of the best tight ends in the NFL for years now, how much longer is he going to play? Obviously, he's a freak. He loves contact. He loves all that. So I think he'll play for as long as his body lets him. But there's a lot of moving pieces in the 49ers in the sense of, man, if we sign him this much, if we sign Purdy for this much money, right, we're going to have guys just like he did, who wasn't a big hit on the cap, contribute in a big way for us to be successful as a franchise.
And Noah, let's not forget, I mean, if this team doesn't draft Brock Purdy with that Mr. Irrelevant pick, where in the world would the 49ers be right now? The Brock Purdy situation absolutely saved them from the embarrassment that we all know of Trey Lance. They gave up the absolute farm to trade up and take this guy who is one of the all-time biggest quarterback bust and draft pick bust in general that we will ever see in the NFL, in my opinion. So, they're finally out of the mud in terms of what they had to give up to trade up and get him, right? So you're looking at this year, they had their first, they had their second, they have 2/3, 2/4, 2/5, and 3/7. So they have a chance, like I said, to fill out and help build back up this roster. I mean, you and I are both pretty heavy on the fact that they're still contenders in the NFC. They still have a really good chance to win their division, them and the Rams. So yeah, that's the first team, Noah, off the bat that I think desperately needs to nail this upcoming draft. So I know a team that you want to talk about. Take us to the AFC North and the Cincinnati Bengals.
Yeah, so just looking at the Bengals, you franchise tag T. Higgins, which understandable, right? He's a good playmaker, big receiver. Then you give the bag to Jamar Chase, which you gave them both bags eventually with the signing of T. Higgins again. So when you look at how much you did in the offseason, you kind of just retained. You didn't go out and get, right? So we didn't have any additions of new players. And then Sam Hubbard retires, who was a solid defensive end for you, right? The only other thing you did in the offseason, you signed Cody Ford and you extended Gesicki to extensions, right? So you gave those guys both extensions. When you look at that, right, you're kind of, man, what are the Bengals doing here? We just gave up a lot of money. We invested in these weapons, right? I think the Bengals are in a very murky territory, and that's why they need to absolutely kill these draft picks because, look, your division's only getting better, right? The Ravens, who were phenomenal last year, if they don't get any better, I still don't know if you...
MVP caliber quarterback every single year, Lamar Jackson. I mean, they're not going anywhere for a long time.
Exactly. That's what I was about to say. You are not, like, even if the Ravens don't get any better, I don't know if your roster still matches up with what they have across the sticks from you.
Yeah.
And then you look at the Steelers, who you and I both think Aaron Rodgers might be headed that way, who just got a whole lot better because they got a competent quarterback if the Steelers were to get Rodgers. So
Rodgers, along with the defense. I mean,
exactly.
Obviously they had their struggles late towards the end of the year last year, ultimately led to the Ravens beating them in the playoffs. But yeah, always a competent defense. Micah Parsons, TJ Watt, Highsmith, guys all over the place. And then, the Cleveland Browns, who knows? Are you looking at maybe Shadur Sanders is on that team here in April?
Yeah, and I think that's something to say here too, Gage, is like, if you were in another division, I don't think it matters as much, right? If you're in the NFC South or even the AFC South with the Saints, Texans, Colts, I'm not missing a team, they're Jags. If you're in that division, I don't think it's that big. You're not in a situation, but because of the division you're in and how competitive it is, and you have an MVP caliber quarterback in yourself with Joe Burrow, right? You gave him the weapons, right? Kind of worried about that offensive line. I know you signed back Ford. Mason Halfin would have loved to see him not sign back. Shout out to Mason there, a big Bengals fan, one of our friends. You're seeing a lot of these guys where you spent a lot of money on your playmakers, but what did you do outside of that, right? It seems like you spent a lot of money for retention rather than going out and gaining additional pieces. So you look at your draft, yes, you have your first round pick, you have your second round pick, you have your third round pick. That first round pick, you're picking at 17. I think you go defensive there, Gage. I'm not sure.
You have to go. Yeah. No, I mean, let's get one thing straight, right? Their entire, I would have to imagine their entire game plan in this upcoming draft is to get better on the defensive side of the ball because you need help pretty much everywhere. BJ Hill and Chris Jenkins. I know Chris Jenkins, draft pick out of Michigan, I believe it was last year, didn't really get a ton of playing time due to injury. Is Trey Hendrickson your really talented edge rusher? Are you trading him? Are you not? Like, what's the deal with that? That's another storyline that we're still waiting to see. You desperately need help at linebacker, and then the secondary was arguably one of the worst in NFL. I don't know, not history, but last year. I mean, for God's sake, Noah, Russell Wilson threw for like 400 some yards on them. They have got to go on defense with at least half of this upcoming draft.
So, and that's like where it's at too. Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, and T. Higgins can only be so good, right? They can only be so good, and we saw it last year. They were phenomenal. Burrow and Chase and Higgins, whenever he was playing, were phenomenal. The greatest trio in the NFL at receiver, at quarterback, trio right there. I fully, wholeheartedly believe that. But when you look at it, they can't win the game themselves. They have to have something on the defensive side of the football. So you look at the first round, second round, third round, and they also they traded their 7th round pick to the Bears last year for Khalil Herbert when they were in a little bit of a running back scare there for a little bit and still in contention. Yeah. So you've got 6 picks, and like you said, at least half of them, I would kind of range to say 5 of your picks probably have to be on the defensive side of the football because you need a lot of help there. Also, a little bit of help on the offensive line side of the ball, in my opinion. Because
specifically interior.
Yeah, because
like Amarius Mims. Yeah, Amarius Mims. You drafted in the first round, pretty solid right tackle with room to grow, and then Orlando Brown also dealt with some injuries, but a really good left tackle when he gets things rolling.
You got to keep. You've invested all this money in Burrow and your offense in general. You have to keep him clean back there. You have to keep him upright, and I think that's Burrow. Obviously, we've seen him kind of. I wouldn't say a gunslinger.
He's gunslinger. But I thought you were going this route in terms of he's kind of came out a relatively quiet guy since he's been in the league, but he kind of has come out and voiced some concerns and frustrations. Hey, I want my guys paid. Like, I don't want Jamar Chase and T. Higgins walking out of this door. Like, I think this was kind of his way of signaling. I'm kind of pissed off at the way you guys are handling this franchise while I've been here. Let's spend some money. Let's make some moves. Let's get back to a Super Bowl and let me bring a Super Bowl to Cincinnati. I think that's kind of the mindset that he has.
He even said that with Hendrickson. Saying, bring him back even on the defensive side of the football because even Burrow understands that it takes 2 sides of the football. We saw the Eagles and the Chiefs, who both made it to the Super Bowl, they were both 2 very defensive-minded teams, right? They turned the other team over, and when they got the ball, they capitalized. So
specifically the Chiefs last year, I mean, they were they relied on their defense more so than ever. I mean, a lot of the games that they won were 1-possession games. So, it's go time, man.
It's heartbreaking to know for Joe Burrow, too. Like, he knows he has to have the ball last because that defensive side of the football is going to, just continue to give up points. So, like I said, if the Bengals were in a different division, it's a completely different story. So I don't want people to sit here and say, oh, he's saying, the Bengals are one of the worst teams in the league, this and that, blah, blah, blah. No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying because of the division they're in, right? It is very easy to go 500 in that division, and in some sense, you still have a successful season because that is a phenomenal division, right? It is very easy to go 8-8 there, but if you're the Bengals with an MVP caliber quarterback, a Triple Crown Award winner at receiver, and the best wide receiver too in the game, in T. Higgins, in my opinion, you are shooting for more than an 8-8, or it's actually would have been 9-8 season,
9-8.
10-8, 10-7 season. You're shooting for more than that. You want to make it to the big dance, to the biggest game of the year in the Super Bowl. And I
Yeah.
think that's something you're able to do if you hit your picks in this draft.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this isn't a video necessarily. I've kind of been doing some mock drafts so you get a better sense of where I'm at with players, but they desperately need a game changer on that defensive side of the ball. So I'm agree with you 100% there. So kind of the last two teams we're going to discuss, Noah, are some teams who are picking pretty high in this draft, but you and I both believe if they are to have a good draft this upcoming year or this upcoming April, have a chance to be really good this upcoming year. So kind of back to me, right? I'm going to talk a little bit of Carolina Panther football. No, a team where you weren't really watching, you weren't sitting down and watching them unless it was a standalone game, and I don't think they had any towards the end of the year last year. But later in the season, Bryce Young, after getting benched and everything he had to deal with, comes back and absolutely turns it on. Down the stretch, he was looking like the true number one pick that all of Carolina and everybody expecting him to be. Yes, he's undersized, but I think Canales, their head coach, once he got back, I think he finally found the rhythm and the way to play with Bryce Young at the helm. I actually got to watch in person when they played the Buccaneers at home later in the year. Dad and I were there. Awesome game. The Bucs won in overtime, but you can see it, man. They run a pretty diverse offense, and a lot of that is due to the fact that Bryce Young is throwing to Xavier Legette, who you traded back into the first round to get that fifth-year option, wide receiver out of South Carolina, and then Adam Thielen, who is still very good, don't get me wrong, but is kind of, towards the end of his playing days. So this is a team where this offseason, I thought they had a pretty decent free agency. They brought in Turk Wharton, defensive end from the Kansas City Chiefs, a guy who's super underrated for us. Pretty excited to see him in a full-time role. Trayvon Moreg, a safety from the Raiders, one of the biggest secondary signings that we saw in the offseason. And now you're sitting here in this upcoming draft, Noah, at pick 8 with the chance to, we talk about the 49ers at 11 have a pretty good chance of getting a really, really good player in this draft. But then the Bengals, there's going to be a slight teardrop. Well, this isn't the case for the Carolina Panthers. This is a team who's going to be able to get a legit, obviously, top 10 player in this draft. Whether that's defensive side of the ball, offensive side of the ball, I've always said and kind of mocked them to Jalen Walker, a linebacker / edge out of Georgia, a guy who can kind of do it all and help fix that defense. There's a ton of ways that they can go in this first round and then throughout the draft to really kickstart and get this team going, man. This is a division that we talk about every year where teams, they go back and forth between the Falcons and Buccaneers. And hell, even this last year, the Saints winning the division. This is a winnable division every single year. And they have got to nail this upcoming draft to have it, to give themselves a chance to be in that 1 or 2 spot in the NFC South.
Yeah, I think that's something that has to be drove home with this topic, Gage, is like, because that division is so up in arms, you have the Buccaneers, who probably would be my favorite to win it, talking right now, right? But you have a lot of ability to make yourself better where you can compete, and if you stay one game out, steal a game here or there, and you're going to the playoffs. I'm not going to say the Panthers are going to make the playoffs this year. It would be a phenomenal story if they did. But like you said, if you get enough key contributors, if you hit big on this first round draft pick that you get, that's pretty early. You have the ability to make your roster good enough where you can compete in that division. And at this time next year, we're talking like, can you believe the Panthers made the playoffs? And we could say, yeah, we did because they drafted well, right? That's an absolute honest answer because that division is open for grabs, right?
Yeah, and I'm pretty high on Dave Canales, their current head coach, who they actually brought from the Buccaneers, and a guy that Baker Mayfield talks very highly on. This is a team every year I watch, and it's one of those teams where it pisses me off to watch them because they could be better than what I see, right? Maybe whether it's problems with ownership and David Tepper, a guy who's kind of been in the media for them, throwing drinks on fans and some negative stuff, or just poor GM decisions. Like, this is a team, and it's time to get it going. There's a team in here, Noah, that you're about to talk about that's picking even higher than the Carolina Panthers, who have even a better situation, in my opinion. But Panthers are a team I look for in this upcoming draft to hopefully get some dynamic playmakers throughout the entire thing, starting with that first round pick, whether it's defense or offense. And like I said, it's just, I get fed up talking about them because it's a team that I expect way more from.
Yeah, and like you said, Bryce Young has had ups, downs, but he's finally showed a glimpse of what we kind of thought he could be out of Alabama. It would be the perfect time to absolutely hit it out of the park in the draft and give yourself a little bit of run outside of even making the playoffs, just giving you a little bit of momentum, a little bit of confidence in what you are as a team and what you are as a franchise and what you're building, right? So I think, like you said, there's no other way around just hitting your draft picks and getting to where people that you draft can contribute to success for your team. So rolling into my pick here, kind of wouldn't say as far as a hot take, but just with the talent that's there, you have the ability to become a playoff team, or let's say wild card team, Gage. Let's say a wild card team with a very good draft. Drake May and the New England Patriots have the ability to get very, very good very, very quickly. I'm kind of worried in what they did in the offseason. Yes, they did go out and get a center in Garrett Bradbury, and they got linebacker Jack Gibbons.
And Morgan Moses, a right tackle from the Jets, who's still, providing some really solid play. A guy Aaron Rodgers is always pretty high on. You'll obviously talk about on the offensive side of the ball, Stephon Diggs, but defensively, Milton Williams was a huge get for them. Guy who's one of the guys who was making me scream at my TV because of the Super Bowl coming over from the Eagles. Harold Landry, decent edge rusher at the linebacker position from Tennessee. Spillane was a really underrated get at linebacker. Carlton Davis, corner. So a team that had a pretty good free agency, in my opinion.
Yeah, and that's like with Carlton Davis and Moses and Spillane. Those are all three great additions. But what you said there was a name with Diggs. You went out and got two weapons, in my opinions, and Mac Hollins, who we saw had a very successful season with Josh Allen, and then Diggs coming from Houston, who is coming off a knee injury that kind of scares me when you're saying, okay, you're going to be probably, in my opinion, was probably their thoughts of wide receiver one there currently, because I don't really know what they're working with in that department.
Yeah, I mean, Diggs, you are signing Diggs coming off this knee injury to provide some spark, I want to say, of wide receiver one potential for this team, right? Because outside of him, you bring in Mac Hollins for what his role is, he's pretty good at. But outside of him, Demario Douglas, Kayshon Boutte, Kendrick Bourne, Halim Polk, who was a second-round pick for them last year out of Washington, I believe it was, just didn't really explode or do anything this rookie season. So you bring in Diggs on a 3-year deal, but I believe that they have an out after the first year of his contract, which does help their case if things go bad. But yeah, you're hoping Diggs can kind of get back to that Buffalo form, really. And he had some good games for Houston this past year before the knee injury, obviously.
So you look at the Patriots and you say, okay, in the division with the Bills, who are a very successful team, we know that's probably going to be the division winner. The Dolphins, who you're thinking, man, you got Tua. How many games does he play? Is Tyreek going to stay in Miami? A lot of questions about that roster down there in Miami. And then you got the Jets, who signed Justin Fields at quarterback. But are they really able to take that jump? I don't know. I hope they do for Jets fans' sake. But this is a very, very good division to steal, a 10-win, 11-win season from the Patriots with an absolute phenomenal rookie quarterback in Drake May. In my opinion, was probably the most overlooked rookie quarterback, in my opinion, because of obviously the hype with Caleb Williams there in Chicago. But
and
Drake
just
May
the
had,
success that Jaden Daniels had, obviously.
correct.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Taking, one of the quarterbacks that didn't necessarily start from the jump. I believe it was Brissett who was kind of
Yep.
playing some games for them there to start the year. But, Yeah, just another guy in what was a loaded quarterback class last year.
So when you look at that, you have that, and then you have a receiver, a veteran receiver in Diggs who can really get on top of. If they were to go receiver at 4, I don't know that they will, but if they do go receiver at 4, you could essentially make the case that Stephon Diggs would be a good veteran for somebody to set under. I think Nico Collins even seen improvement with Diggs on the roster, maybe teaching him a little bit of tips to the trade. You have a lot of picks. Let's go over this here, Gage. You've got obviously your first, you've got your second, you've got 2 in the third, 1 in the fourth, 1 in the fifth, and 3 in the seventh. You have a lot of draft picks here where you can really surround and get contributors on this roster, and you
Mhm.
could make a push for the playoffs because of, for one, we're going to say the lesser a lack of divisional opponent, and additionally, you're pretty good. You kind of seem to be 1, 2, 3 pieces away last year at certain points.
In my opinion, outside of the Ben Johnson hire to Chicago, this was my second favorite head coaching hire with Mike Vrabel, who kind of has some hardball tendencies, in my opinion, in terms of the way his teams are kind of run, really physical, smash mouth football. He, obviously those days of Tannehill and Derrick Henry, some days in Tennessee, that you are obviously familiar with as a fan, where they were making the playoffs with maybe some of the lesser talented teams, right? They obviously had A.J. Brown at receiver there in his younger days, but a team that's kind of built on, foundational football, right? Running the ball, establishing the run, and then kind of building your offense off that. And these draft picks, like you said, your 1, 2, and 2 threes, especially I think about that, the 2 threes that you have, it kind of gives you some wiggle room, Noah, to potentially take one of these upper echelon running backs in a really good running back draft class. Not, no disrespect to Ramondre Stevenson and Antonio Gibson in that running back room, but it's a room that you could definitely upgrade in a draft class as good as this. So I would look for them, at that 4th pick. Maybe it's Tedero McMillan. I personally would probably go Will Campbell. They have a huge void there at left tackle. I think Will Campbell would start. He's a pick and start guy at left tackle for your franchise the next 5 to 8 years. And then, those other picks, you have some room to potentially add some more playmakers to help out Drake May, who you and I are both really high on.
And that's what I think a big point here, because you have those 2 in the third and you have 3 in the seventh, and you still have all your normal picks here. You don't have to stretch too far up the board for your talent because you have a lot of picks that are pretty close together. So if a guy you want to get in, like here in the 3rd round, just for example, you pick 69th, and then you have Atlanta's pick and you pick 77th. So that's 8 picks away. So if you think you can get away with taking somebody at 69 that somebody might behind, the guy that you wanted the first time might find his way back to you at the 77th spot. So I think it will be very interesting to see how they do. And if they have a good draft, Gauge, I think you're seeing a team that, 8, 9 wins this season, and pretty confidently I'd say that.
I agree. I think you and I, identified 4 teams here and splitting it up in kind of categories, right? Bengals and 49ers, 2 teams who are contenders and are looking to get back into that contending realm, right? And they have to do so through the draft because they just didn't have the money to do it through free agency like we saw with some of these other teams. And then vice versa, you see with the Patriots and Panthers, teams that had money just due to the roster construction, but also had the luxury of adding on top of good free agent classes through this draft. So I look for major improvement from the Panthers and the Patriots, and then also the 49ers if they can get healthy in some areas, and the Bengals as well. So
Yeah, this gets
no,
you excited for NFL football, man. I mean, the draft's getting ready
man.
to come up. It's
I, Believe me, I love March Madness, and I enjoy watching college basketball and things like that. I don't want to reach and say I enjoy watching NBA, but I am actively counting down the days until college football and NFL roll back around, man.
all right, Gage. So I think that's all I got for this. If you're all good here,
All good,
like
brother.
like always, like, comment, subscribe. If you have any teams that you think need to knock out the draft, put them in the comments down below. We were kind of talking about the Steelers here, but they've made a lot of successful improvements in the offseason. If they get Aaron Rodgers, that's all they're really looking for is a competent quarterback. So if we got
Yeah,
the Steelers,
I actually do want to say one more thing. Just I can't believe I blanked on this when we were talking about it. Patriots are in a pretty good spot. If Shadur somehow sneaks into the top 3 picks, which there's a very good chance he does to either the Browns or the Giants, they are sitting there at 4, ready to scoop up either Abdul Carter or Travis Hunter,
I
whichever one
know
of the 2 falls.
that's what I was.
They're in a really good spot at pick 4.
It's so hard at that 4 pick at 4, 5, 6. It's so hard to pick on positional need as it is. Like, holy shit, we have a game changer here. We didn't think he'd be here. He's here. Grab him. You know.
I'm a true believer in. I think you use the draft to. I think you use it strictly off talent. I think you buy your needs in free agency. That's kind of always the way I've thought of it.
Yes, sir. So like we were saying there, like, comment, subscribe. Sorry, so many opinions we got to get in here, but like, comment, subscribe, and we appreciate you guys watching.